options for developers and product people and their users. So it's important to understand the kind of variety of things that are happening, and not just what we're doing at Velocity, particularly some of these bigger players and what they're up to. Because I think it's important that we continue to track them and understand where they are. So let's start with Apple and Google. And so Apple and Google are starting with driver's licenses, right? You've probably all seen the announcements about it. Currently, and we've talked to them, they're currently not interested in career credentials at all. You know, it's a very much a use case of identity that they're really dealing with. Google's a bit more open to VCs in general, but I think they're just trying to help enable other wallets to cover these use cases. LinkedIn obviously is the other behemoth we need to keep an eye on and keep talking with. So they've also announced this collaboration with Microsoft Entra, which is a way to verify where you're working right now. Basically verifies your current email address, work email address, and uses that to verify that you currently are working there, and then you get this little tick. Doesn't really show very well, but about you. So, as I said, we continue to talk with them, and obviously, them entering the wallet space would be a big change, but they're, mega tanker and will take forever if they're going to do anything. So there's still, and this is very simplistic what they're doing compared to any of the demos you saw downstairs, right? I guess the last point is no one would trust it if it was just LinkedIn, right? You've got to have the ecosystem side. And that's something they're learning. So career wallets. So we can, it's basically an application for storing those education and career credentials. There's obviously a lot of personal information on them. We want the individuals to be in control of that data. It's not, as I was talking to someone earlier, Liz earlier, it's not an NFT, it's not public information. This is private information. You only want to share it with trusted third parties or counterparties that you want to interact with. And the keys in particular are being used to authenticate both the identity of the individual and improve ownership over those credentials. And it's those keys that are very, very private, right? As you'll know from the crypto space, right? Whoever owns the keys owns the crypto. Well, whoever owns the keys owns these credentials. So managing keys is really the hardest problem, maybe outside of UX, but even that whole UX of key management is a problem, right? But these are the two main issues that you have with wallets, in my opinion, right? For that reason, wallets should be from professional organizations, organizations that know how to deal with keys, right? You're not gonna, not encrypting those keys or not storing it on some sort of key management device would be really bad, right? So those providers of wallets need to be trusted. So we already have these three wallets. We actually have a fourth one coming. I showed that in the CCG. It's an older slide here. So there's a fourth one coming from Certify. You saw them demo yesterday. And all of them at the moment, these three, at the moment are mobile wallets. They're all fairly similar designs in that the keys are on the devices encrypted. And this last one is going to be a web wallet. So it's a bit different, and let's open up on what's different here, okay? So an important concept, and this comes from the crypto world, so those of you who are familiar with it will recognize this. So we have the concept of custodial, non-custodial, right? I was talking about keys earlier, right? Where are those keys located? Are they on the personal device of the individual, or are they sitting on a server controlled by the wallet provider, right? If it's the latter case, that's a custodial wallet. Somebody's custodying your keys for you, right? In the end, there's this uncertainty around if you're using such a wallet, how well are they looking after your keys on their servers? Is it open to some sort of hack? And so on. I'll go through all these differences. In non-custodial, the keys are on your device on software that you're running. Okay, that's the main difference. And you can also apply it also for the credentials. I tend to talk about keys because that's the most sensitive piece of information here, but the same applies for credentials. They could either be sitting on a server or they can be sitting on a device directly. So the Velocity reference wallet is a non-custodial wallet. Okay, everything's sitting on the device. Means it's very hard to hack, right? Because it's completely decentralized. I have to attack Marty's device, then my device, and Scott's device, right? If it's sitting on a server, cool, I've got that server to attack. You know, if they haven't applied the latest patches to whatever they're running, I might be able to get in and get access to the keys and the credentials. And it's available on the internet really easily, right, that server, because somehow, maybe I can get access to their DevOps person's computer and get in that way, you know, something like that. They've left the VPN connection open. So custodial wallets, you know, the threat vector there is very, very different from non-custodial. In custodial also, you can't do offline use cases. One of the things about the Apple wallets and the mobile driver's licenses they're available for offline use cases. So you don't need to have an internet connection for the police officer to be able to check your license, right? You can do that in the non-custodial world, right? If the credential's on the server and you don't have it downloaded, oh well. So obviously we've gone through some of the bad aspects of custodial. Why would you ever go custodial? Well, typically it's so much easier experience for the individual. They don't have to deal with keys. You don't have to build backup. I mean, you don't really need to build backup for keys, right? There's so many more capabilities available for developers to enable a good user experience. And it's also easier to support access via all the user's devices in a secure manner, right? So you can have a tablet, you can have a browser version. It's the same credentials and keys everywhere available. Why? Because if you ever need to present credentials to anyone, that key's sitting on that central server, you grab the credentials, you sign the presentation, and off it goes up to a recruiter's platform, right? And you can use any device you want for interacting. So it's much easier to build. Tends to be better user experiences. I think that pretty much covers it. Any questions around custodial, non-custodial? Yeah?
We operate a hybrid between the two.
Yeah.
Which is explain. I mean, you know.
One you explain.
Yeah. So Yoti, we kind of engage with enterprises because we have a centralized infrastructure. Because it's easier to be audited for SOC 2 and for a whole bunch of other pieces. But we still store all the cryptographic keys in the secure enclave on the device. So we call it a hybrid because you get a decentralized benefit of it being in the user, which is some of the good bits on the right, yet you still retain some of the easier bits on the left, which would be for recovery and backup and transition from one phone to the other and so forth. So I guess it's just to highlight that there are other...
Sure, it's not this strict dichotomy.
There's a bit of a spectrum between that. Yeah. But I think that's really good summary.
Can I?
Yeah.
How are keys handled when it's non-custodial and you're changing devices?
So that's a very good question. That's the hard thing. So typically, what you need is actually a number of keys that individual controls, and so that key set represents the individual.
Yeah, if a good example of, say, Yoshi's when we transition for backup, you've got each attribute or each credential, as you call them there, have got their own set of keys. One is a user key, one's a Yoshi key, so we can tell it's a date of birth, but we don't know the detail. And then all of those are wrapped up in the whole set, so there's a whole key chain, a whole bunch of them together, which is sort of the only downsides on the right is that one of the main ones is the backup and recovery kind of process when you lose it. I think it is important for the industry, so we've got some government use cases, and the average cycle might be 12 and 14 months when they use the app.
Yeah.
And by that point they've got a new phone, and they are, how do I get, so if we store the key in iCloud or within Google Drive, they can facilitate an easy download to restore their account.
Okay, so let's think about user interfaces, right? So we have desktops on the left and tablets and mobiles on the right. Okay, so with desktops, obviously we have larger screens and we have small screens on the mobile side. Desktop will be great for large credentials, images and PDFs and comprehensive credential schemas like CLR. The comprehensive learner record, which will contain many entries about an individual's whole education, even employment experience. Versus mobile and what you see in Velocity at the moment, we kind of are targeting more this micro-credential space at the moment. In terms of the user interfaces we're trying to bring forth. So we're very much at the moment in the micro-credentials realm. There obviously is a lot of demand, particularly in the US, for supporting the CLR, and probably in the education cluster, we'll start to, there'll be demand for that. I think it will be tricky on mobile device. I've seen those. Shrikant isn't here, but he's, has CLRs on their existing applications, and these are very nested, highly complex credential schemas, and to present that to an individual that they would even understand that will be quite difficult if you're not operating a desktop. So as we were kind of talking, in tablets and mobile, they typically have secure enclaves and that sort of thing. Versus desktops, where it will be there is some equivalence, but it's a bit less. It's been perhaps a bit less common, but nowadays most have Intel TPM as well. Biometrics and mobile, of course. We all are unlocking nowadays with biometrics, but on the laptop front, they don't tend to exist. Or they can exist, but they're a bit less commonly used. Let's say you can't guarantee it's going to be there. And on top of it, in desktops, the locking tends to take a bit longer. So people will leave their computers open. And so getting access to that device and therefore potentially getting access to someone's credentials is a bit easier. When we were talking with background screeners, one of the things that was pointed out is if you're using a desktop, you probably want to do a second factor of authentication using a mobile device, because of that problem of the computers being unlocked and being kind of freely accessible in an open workspace environment. You want to use a personal device as well to guarantee that this is really the same person. So you end up having to go to a mobile device in some of the most, the use cases that require the largest amount of privacy and security. And then, of course, to get them to interact is more difficult in desktop, right? They've got an app open, then they forget about it, and it just sits there in the background. And you don't have push notifications. So these are basically the main differences if you need to think through if you're building a desktop one versus tablets and mobile.
I just want to say a quick comment there,
Yeah.
right? So the biggest difference I see personally is from the user experience, but like friction, where you don't have to download an app to kind of like.
Well, you might. This is just desktop and tablets now, and then the next one is apps, browser extensions, and websites. So I can kind of.
Third layer.
There's this third dimension that we need to think through, right?
Andres?
Yeah.
Can I speak to the CLR just
Sure.
for a moment? Just because
Yeah.
we have experience in that.
Sure you do.
One thing around the CLR is that the idea is that you actually have a top level credential statement. So like for a transcript, it says like, this transcript was issued from North Dakota, for example. Then you have multiple assertions of every course as individual assertions. And the transcript has an assertion with an image. So you do have a simple statement at the top level that you can show on a mobile device.
Sure.
But at the same time, you've got that depth of the multi-assertion within the credential. So just a little clarification.
Yeah. No, sorry.
No,
I should have.
not at all.
All right, so then we have apps, browser extensions, and websites, right? Apps have, you're going to be using an app store to distribute. Browser extensions, that's the typical crypto way of doing things, right? It's if you're in the non-custodial wallet space, and they are available through web stores, or you just download them and trust them, and all sorts of strange interactions as far as most normal human beings are concerned, I think. And then obviously websites, cool. Just go on Google and it's bookmarkable and installable. Apps have access to the TPMs and the secure enclaves and all that good security stuff. So it's really the only option if you're wanting to do really high quality non-custodial. If you're in the browser websites, yeah, you can encrypt things on local storage, but it's not as good as using those hardware devices, right? If you want to do that non-custodial version, obviously, if you're using custodial, you can put the keys on the server, and then those servers can have those secure devices. You don't even need to get access to those keys ever, right? If you design it in a particular way, in the right way, right? And that's what Europe, for example, is kind of mandating for the wallet implementations that they've outlined in the IDAS v2.0 specification architecture framework, that you can either go down this route with the secure enclaves and so on, or it goes to a server and it must be using a secure device on that server. They use that for the highest level credential types like identity and that sort of thing. They're a bit easier going for other credential types. And then lastly, you can use authentication, apps get access to the biometrics, you have the whole kind of devices, whatever the device's capability is. And whereas with websites, you're using passwords or MFA or maybe WebAuthn. WebAuthn, for those aren't familiar, is a way of using essentially your biometrics to log in, but in the browser. So this stuff is coming, so you'll get somewhat equality here between all these things on that level. So in terms of trust, covering a slightly different angle now, right? For the individuals who are getting these credentials and getting and sharing it with relying parties who they may not know personally, right? I'm applying for a job. I just read about, I found this job. It looks like they need my stuff. I read about them on the internet, maybe. Maybe I'm just like posting my stuff everywhere. But I still, I want to make sure, I want to I want to make sure that who I'm sharing that data with and who I'm getting the credentials from are the genuine organizations. For notaries, which me and Scott are going to talk about later, that those notaries are accredited. You know, they can't just make up credentials, right? Particularly, I mean, me as a user, I want to know that. As an individual, I want to know that, because when I share, I don't want to have this credential come up as bad, right? As not trusted. And obviously the wallet providers, as we have kind of been going on about here, custodial, non-custodial, can they be trusted to manage keys properly? Are they accredited for handling these things well? Are they professional and trustworthy? So there's a whole bunch of trust that users of varying, you know, levels of maturity, technical maturity, right? Not everyone is aware of these issues, but, you know, if they think about it, they'll be like, oh, I want to make sure that who I'm sharing my data with is the genuine organization. That's probably the most important one for them. But there's these other knock-on consequences around the issuers that they're interoperating with, and even their wallet provider. Can they be trusted or not? So, as many of you will know, we supply SDKs for building wallets. And why do we do that, right? We currently, the reason is because we want to try and wrap up particularly those trust problems into one easy to use interface that interacts with our trust registry. So you guys don't need to implement that logic, and we can supply to an individual a really high trust environment for receiving their credentials and sharing their credentials. So currently the SDK supports non-custodial wallets only. So that is, the keys are being stored on the devices themselves. It's currently encrypted or using the secure enclave. It's up to the developer what they want to do. We have a Node.js version of the SDK that's being contributed by Certifier. So that will be enabling a custodial wallet where the keys are on the servers, and it will enable websites and desktop-based wallets and all that stuff that we haven't had to date.
That's hopeful.
Hopefully. In a week and a half, I got told. Yeah. So we want to also offer optional support for that custodial solution. So you'll be able to choose, you'll be able to pick and choose how you want to handle your keys. We can offer a standardized protocol for doing key signing on the server, the same way we do for exchange of credentials as well. Yeah.
So I did want to add a couple of trends that are happening in the marketplace. I don't know if you were going to cover Open Wallet or if you were going to cover EIDAS 2.
No, please, feel free.
So in the marketplace, right now, the wallet is really going through a lot of standards and scrutinization, mostly in the EU. So in the EU a year ago, the EU put in regulation, law, that says if you're going to use a wallet for the handling of crypto-related information, whether it's money, credentials, you're going to use a wallet that's going to be designed and follows the standards that the EU is mandating. With a law, a second version of EIDAS. EIDAS deals with trusted third parties, but EIDAS 2.0.
It was actually the next slide.
Providing the requirements, and they're almost finished. I hope by the end of the summer, they've at least nailed down what the requirements would be for their own wallet, and also if you want to use the wallet in that jurisdiction, you better follow that, because that would go under an accreditation scheme. It's very similar to EIDAS 1 regarding conformance assessment bodies and ISO-driven type of scheme, accreditation scheme. in the EU. If you want to play in the EU, you probably want to, look at what's happening there because we have a global network. The other thing is, the Linux Foundation has developed a open source forum called the Open Wallet Foundation. And they're creating an open source wallet that will have code that you can use that will fit the EIS 2. So, there'll be more tools available and moving in a bigger ecosystem than just Velocity. Velocity is a major ecosystem driving business cases, but this is a bigger situation that is requiring, the advancement of global standards for the internet and others, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the second session.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff happening across multiple ecosystems. We're talking about EIS 2 and the architecture framework. OECD is launched some legal advice for governance of digital identity. We have all sorts of things happening in the digital ID space that are influencing how we will be building wallets in the future. And obviously Microsoft is there because, it's Microsoft and they own a lot of identity stuff in enterprise space. So key takeaways. The key management thing is a real headache, and we need to figure out the best ways of managing that. And I think the stuff that's in the EIS regulation is really spot on in the way that people should be managing things. Custodial wallets can be done safely as long as there's a good architecture there. And so some of the anti-custodial solution talk that comes from the crypto space, right, is probably a bit overblown in areas where we can use accreditation and certifications as an alternative to using hardware devices to store your keys and that sort of thing. And it certainly makes it easier and promotes broader adoption of this technology. It makes the multi-device and offline access use cases are important to consider as well when you're building wallets. You can, as you pointed out, you can kind of mix the custodial and non-custodial to enable easy recovery and multi-device and offline access. You can actually mix and match some of these paradigms, as John was mentioning. So the important thing is that the wallet providers need to be professional and trustworthy. So at the moment, we don't accredit wallet providers in the Velocity network, but it's certainly something that as we move along, maybe with the EIDAS and that sort of thing, we can piggyback a lot of the government regulation like we're kind of planning to do with notary issuing and identity issuing, so we don't have to do it all ourselves because that would be a pain in the bum. So thank you very much everyone for listening. If there's any more questions, thoughts? Yes?
So can you comment on porting credentials from, say, one wallet to others? I'm starting out with custodial because that's easier for me, but now I feel confident that I can manage a non-custodial wallet. So moving from wallet 1 to wallet 2.
Yeah, so it's about having a way to add a key to your key set is the main trick here, right? So if you, it's like something that perhaps isn't, it's not, I mean, DIDs can be used for that, right? That's a total, but the thing is for individuals, DIDs are not. There's problems with DIDs for individuals because then you get a global identifier for a person.
So it could be custodial to non-custodial, that could be one transition. Another transition could be, say for example, I've accumulated a lot of credentials in the reference VCL wallet, but I like what Greenlight is doing, so it's more richer, I can see more information, so now I want to migrate to that.
Yeah.
So So for multiple different reasons, that portability is important.
Yeah, so one question is keys and the other is credentials, right? As long as your credentials conform to one of the acceptable standards, you know, which tends to be at the moment the JWTVC or what are called JSON LD. These are the two main ones. Then probably most wallets will be able to enable some sort of import-export, though that format is, I mean, I think there was some initiatives earlier, like with, I forgot what it was. There was a CCG work item around this at some point, but it's a bit taken over by the Open Wallet Foundation stuff. But
I guess just to build on that, I think, for foundations or governments to invest in the ecosystem, I think they'll need to ensure that the wallets do have that portability of the credentials.
yeah,
Because they wouldn't want to have lock-in if the company goes out of business or they decide there's some other product that they should invest in.
yeah. I mean, that's why. I mean, I think the EU itself is, while it's trying to, you always have this question mark. But you can't really see this, but here, they've basically said, oh, you can have these two formats for identity. Identity is like the first box, effectively. And then they've got, oh, you can use three formats for these, for less critical credentials, such as career credentials, right? So two of these things are, from what I recall, I can't see it, but from what I recall, it's like two of them are the same, more or less. And then one is like, oh, you could use JSON LD as well for that use, for these less critical use cases. But, I don't like restraining the technical options here, obviously will lead to better interoperability.
One thing I would just add to that is we find this a lot. I strongly advise against the desire to say it must be at current point of contract interoperable, because we get this with the NHS in the UK that it must be interoperable. So that actual market doesn't exist today.
Yeah.
So I think the clauses, just to be specific, should be that you should have a pathway to, you should demonstrate that you're on a journey towards interoperability, and then you kind of leave it open. Otherwise, you just keep pushing the can down the road. So. Yeah, I mean, even the W3C formats. I mean,
yeah,
so
the VC JWT format.
If you run a business, you wouldn't have incorporated that already by this point. So I think the wallets get unfairly sort of set the standards that haven't actually been really finalised or harmonised at all. I mean, EIDAS 2.0 is really just out.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of key thing if you're thinking about it. Traditionally, you'd have a contract that would enable a good exit and termination clause, so you don't get vendor lock-in. It's kind of the same, but you want an exit with portability.
Yeah.
One last thing I want to add, because we talked about the SDK stuff. We had a conversation with the Velocity team in Amherst about using ChatGPT to be able to convert these SDKs, so a lot of people can use them in different languages and we can produce more wallets. But working on them now, we've kind of seen that that's not currently possible yet because of the architecture of the SDK. So I think larger conversations could be had regarding the general architecture if we are to say, okay, let's kind of streamline this conversion and let everybody use SDKs and the technologies that they want. But we've come to a spot where we don't think that it's really applicable as of the current state. And I think that's an important kind of aspect of this, having the technology of ChatGPT and stuff like that. I think that's important.
So I have no idea about this timetable, but I guess we're at 40 minutes, so. So in case you want to go to something else, we're about to start, me and Scott are about to start talking about notary and identity issuing.
Talk about what we're going to say and not say in half of this.
But you've got these other sessions going on in different
Scott, can you share the slides afterwards?